Persuasion by Jane Austen. Chapter 23. One day only had passed since Anne's conversation with Mrs. Smith, but her keener interest had succeeded, and she was now so little touched by Mr. Elliott's conduct, except for its effect in Walcoter, and it became a matter of course the next morning, still to defer her explanatory visits in River Street. She had to promise to be with the Mungroves from breakfast to her dinner. Her faith was plighted, and Mr. Elliott's character, like the spontaneous scareheads, must live another day. She could not but keep her appointment punctually. However, the weather was unfavourable, and she grieved over the rain on her friend's account, and felt it very much on her own before she was able to attempt the walk. And she had reached the White Hart, and made her way the proper apartment. She had found neither of them quite arriving in time, and nor the first to arrive. The party before her were Mrs. Mungrove talking to Mrs. Croft, and Captain Harville to Captain Wentworth. She immediately heard that Mariana Rita, too patient to wait, had gone out the moment it had cleared, but would be back again soon; that the strictest injunctions had been left with Mrs. Mungrove to keep her till they returned. She had only had to wait and sit down to be outwardly composed, and feel herself plunged at once in all agitations when she merely laid her account of tasting a little before the morning closed. There was no delay, no time to waste, and she was still deep in happiness of such misery, or of the misery of such happiness, instantly. 2 minutes after her entering the room, Captain Wentworth said, "We will write a letter we were talking of. Captain Harwell, now, if you will give me the materials." The materials were at hand, on a separate table. He went to it, and nearly turning his back to them all, was engrossed in writing. Mrs. Mungrove was giving Mrs. Croft the history of her eldest daughter's engagement, and that in the inconvenient tone of voice was perfectly audible, and it was pretended to be a whisper. Anne felt that she did not belong to the conversation, and yet, as Captain Harville seemed thoughtful and did not dispose to talk, she could not but avoid hearing many undesirable particulars, such as how Mr. Mungrove and my brother Hayter met again and talked it over, what my brother Hayter had said one day, and what Mr. Mungrove had proposed the next, and what occurred to my sister Hayter, and what the young people had wished, and what I had said first would never consented to, but was afterward persuaded to think might do very well, in a great deal the same style of open-hearted communication, minutiae which, with every advantage of taste and delicacy, which good Mrs. Mungrove could not give, could be properly interesting on one of the principles. Mrs. Croft was attending to great humour, and whenever she spoke at all, it was very sensibly, and hoped the gentleman might be too much self-occupied to hear. "And so, ma'am, after all these things considered," said Mrs. Mungrove in a powerful whisper, "though we wished it differently, yet, altogether, we did not think it fair to stand out any longer, for Charles Hayter was quite wild about it, and Henrietta was pretty near as bad, so we thought they'd better marry at once, and make the best of it, as for many others who had done before them. And at any rate, would be better it will be better than a long engagement." "That is precisely what I was going to observe," cried Mrs. Croft. "I would rather have young people settle on a small income at once, than have to struggle with a few difficulties together that would involve in a long engagement. I think that there is no mutual—" "Oh, dear Miss Croft!" cried Miss Mungrove, unable to let her finish the speech, "there is nothing so abominate for young people as a long engagement. It is always what I protested against my children. It is all very well, I used to say, for young people to be engaged, if there is a certainty of being able to marry in 6 months, or even in 12, but in the engagement— Yes, my dear ma'am," said Mrs. Croft, "or an uncertain engagement, an engagement which may be long to begin without knowing that such a time will be the means of marrying, and I hold it to be very unsafe and wise, and I think that all parents should prevent as far as they can." Anne found an unexpected interest here, and she felt its application to herself. It felt a nervous thrill over her, and at the same moment that her eyes instinctively glanced down towards the distant table, And Captain Wentworth's pen ceased to move. His head was raised, pausing and listening, and turned around, given next instant to give a look, one quick, conscious look to her. The two ladies continued to talk, to re-urge the same admitted truths, to enforce them with such examples of the ill effect on the contrary practice that had fallen within their conversation. But Anne heard nothing distinctly, and it was only a buzz of words in her ear. Her mind was still in confusion. Captain Harville, who in the truth had been hearing none of it, now left his seat, moved to a window, and Anne seemed to watch him, and seemed thorough from absence of mind, and became gradually sensible as if he was inviting her to join him where he stood. He looked at her with a smile and a little motion of his hand, which expressed, "Come to me, I have something to say," and the unaffected, easy kindness of the manner which denoted feelings of an older acquaintance than he really was. Strongly enforced with the invitation, she roused herself and went with him. The window which he stood was on the other end of the room where the two ladies were sitting, though nearer to Captain Wentworth's table, not very near, as she joined him. Captain Harville's countenance resumed in the serious, thoughtful expressions which seemed not natural character. "Look here," said he, unfortunately unfolding a parcel in his hand and displaying a small miniature painting. "Do you know who that is?" "Certainly, Captain Benwick." "Yes, you may guess who it is, for—" but in a deep tone, "it was not done for her, Miss Elliot. Do you remember our walk together at Lyme, in grieving for him? I little thought then. But no matter. This was drawn at Cape, and he met a little clever young German artist at Cape, in compliance with a promise to my poor sister, sat to him, and was bringing it home for her, and I've now the charge of getting it properly set another. It was a commission to me, but who else was there to employ? I can only I can hope I can allow for him. I am not sorry indeed to make it over another. He undertakes it," looks towards Captain Wentworth. "He is writing it about it now," and with a quivering of lip he would be wound out about the whole, adding, "Poor Fanny! She would not have been forgotten him so soon." "No," replied Anne in a low, feeling voice, I can easily believe. It was not her nature. She doted on him. It would not be the nature of any woman who truly loved." Captain Harville smiled, as much as to say, "Do you claim that for your sex?" And she answered the question, smiling so, "Yes, we certainly do not forget as soon as you forget us. It is, perhaps, our fate rather than our merit. We cannot help ourselves. We live at home, quiet, confined, and our feelings prey upon us. You are forced on exertion. You always have a profession, pursuits, and business of some sort or other. Do you take back into the world immediately, and continual occupation, and change soon weaken impressions. Granting your assertion that the world does all this mean so soon for men, which I do not think I shall grant, it does not apply to Benwick. He has not been forced upon any exertion. But the peace turned him on shore the very moment, and he has been living with us, with our little family circle, ever since." "True," said Anne, "very true. I did not recollect, but what shall we say now, Captain Harville? If the change not be for our outward circumstances, it must be from within. In the nature, a man's nature, which has done the business for Captain Benwick." "No, no, it is not a man's nature, but I will not allow it to be more than a man's nature than a woman's to be inconstant with those feelings and forget those they do love or have loved. I believe the reverse. I believe in the true analogy between our bodily frames and our mental is that our bodies are the strongest, and so are our feelings, capable of bearing the most rough usage and riding out the heaviest weather." "Your feelings may be the strongest," replied Anne, "but the same spirit of analogy will authorize me to assert that ours are the most tender. Man is more robust than woman, and by he is no longer lived, which explains my view of the nature of their attachments. Nay, it would be too hard upon you if it was otherwise. You will have difficulties and privations and dangers close enough to struggle with, and you are always laboring and toiling, exposed to every risk and hardship. Your home, your country, friends, all quitted. Neither time, nor health, nor life to be called on your own. It'd be hard, indeed." With a faltering voice, "If the woman's feelings were to be added to all this—" "We shall never agree upon this question," Captain Harville was beginning to say, when a slight noise called their attention to Captain Wentworth's hitherto perfectly quiet division of the room. It was nothing than the pen he had fallen had fallen down, but Anne was startled to finding him never nearer than she thought, half inclined to suspect that the pen had only fallen because he had occupied by them, striving to catch sounds which she did not think he could have caught. "Have you finished your letter?" said Captain Harville. "Not quite. A few lines more. I should have it done in 5 minutes. There's no hurry on my side. I am only ready whenever you are. I am a very good anchorage here," smiling at Anne. "Well supplied, want for nothing, no hurry for a signal at all. Well, Miss Elliot," lowering his voice, "as I was saying, we shall never agree, I suppose, upon this point. No man and woman would, probably. But let me observe that all histories are against you in stories, prose, and verses. I have such a memory as Benwick that I should bring you 50 quotations in a moment on my side of that argument. I do not think I ever opened a book in my life which had not said something upon a woman's inconstancy. Songs and proverbs all talk of woman's fickleness. Perhaps you will say that they were all written by men. Perhaps I shall. Yes, yes, if you please. This is no reference to examples in books. Men have very different advantage of us in telling their own story. Education has been theirs in so much a higher degree, and the pen in their hands. I'll not allow books to prove anything. But how shall we prove anything? We never shall. We can never expect to prove anything upon such a point. It is a difference of opinion which does not admit proof. We begin, probably, with a little bias towards our own sex, and that upon the bias every circumstance in favour of it has occurred within our own circle. Many of which circumstances, perhaps those cases which strikes us the most, may be precisely as cannot be brought forward without betraying a confidence, or, in some respect, saying what should not be said. "Ah!" cried Captain Harville, in a tone of strong feeling, "but if I could make you comprehend what a man suffers when he takes a last look of his wife and children, and watches the boat as he sends them off as long as it is in sight, then turns away and says, 'God knows whether we may ever meet again,' and then, if can convey to you the glow of his soul, and when he does see them again, when coming back in a 12 months' absence, perhaps, and obliged to put in another port, he calculates how soon it would be possible to get them there, pretending to disease himself, and says they cannot be healed till such a day, and they'll but all while hoping to do them 12 hours sooner, and seeing them arrive at last, if heaven had given them wings, and by many hours sooner still, if I could explain to you all this that a man could bear do, and a glorious to do for the sakes of these treasures and of existence, and you only know of such men can have hearts, and pressing on with emotion, "Oh!" cried Anne eagerly, "I do hope I do justice with that is felt by you, in those who resemble you. God forbid that I should have undervalued any warmth and faithful of any of the fellow creatures. I should deserve utter contempt if I dare say suppose that the true attachment of constancy were known only by a woman. No, I believe that you are capable of everything great and your mind is good in married lives. I believe you equal to have every important exertion, and to every domestic forbearance. So long, if I may be allowed the expression, so long as you have an object, I mean, while the woman you love lives for you. All the privilege I claim for my own sex, it is not a very inviolable one, you need not covet it, is that longest when existence of when hope is gone. She could not immediately have uttered another sentence. Her heart was too full, her breath much too oppressed. "You are a good soul," cried Captain Harville, putting his hand around her arm quite affectionately. "There is no quarrelling within you, and when I think of Captain Benwick, my tongue is tied." Their attention was called towards the others, and Mrs Croft was taking a leave. "Here, Frederick, you and I part company, I believe," and she said, "I am going home, and you have an engagement with your friend. Tonight we may have the pleasure of seeing all meetings again your party," turning to Anne. "We had your sister a card yesterday, and I understood Frederick had a card too. Though I did not see it, you were disengaged. Frederick, are you not, as well as ourselves?" Captain Wentworth was folding up a letter in great haste, and either could not answer fully. "Yes," said he, "very true, we are here to separate, but Harville and I shall soon be after you. That is, Harville, if you are ready, and I am half a minute, if I know you not be sorry to be off." Mrs. Croft left them, and Captain Wentworth, having sealed his letter with great rapidity, was indeed ready, and had hurried with even with a hurried agitated air, which shewed impatience to be gone. Anne knew it not to understand it. She had the kindest "Good morning, God bless you," from Captain Hartwell, but not from a word, nor a look. He had passed out the room without a look. She only had the time, however, to move closer to the table which he had been writing, and when footsteps were heard returning, and the door opened, it was himself. He begged their pardon, and he had only forgotten his gloves, and instantly crossing the room to the writing table, he drew out a letter from the scattered paper, and placed it before Anne with the eyes of a glowing entreaty fixed on her for a time. In hasting collecting his gloves, Anne was again out of the room, before Mrs. Mungrove being aware of it, in the work of an instant. Revolution had been one instant made in Anne, and was almost beyond expression. The letter had been hardly legible to Miss A. E. Evidently he had been the one folding it so hastily, and while supposed writing only to Captain Benwick, had been also addressing her. On the contents of the letter had depended on which this world could do for her was anything but possible, and which might defied rather than suspense. Miss Mungrove had a little arrangements of her own and at her own table to protection to and trust, in sinking to their chair which he had occupied, and succeeding to the spot which he had leaned her and written. Her eyes devoured the following words: "I can listen to no longer in silence. I must speak to you by all means as are within my reach. You pierce my soul. I am half in agony, half hope. Tell me not that I am too late, and such precious feelings are gone forever. I offer myself to you again with a heart even more than your own than when you almost broke it, 8.5 years ago. Dare not say that a man forgets sooner than a woman, and his love has an earlier death. I've loved none but you. Unjust I may have been, weak and resentful I have been, but never inconstant. You alone have brought me to Bath, for you alone I think and plan. Have you not seen this? Can you fail in have understood my wishes? I've not waited even these 10 days. I could have read your feelings, as you must have penetrated mine. I can hardly write. Every instant hearing something which overpowers me. You sink your voice, but I can distinguish the tones that voice would be lost on others. Too good, too excellent creature. You do us justice, indeed. You do believe that there is a true attachment and constancy among men, to be the most fervent, undividing. In F.W. I must go, uncertain of my fate, but I shall return hither, or follow your party as soon as possible. A word, a look, will be enough to decide whether I enter your father's house this evening or not. Such a letter would not be soon recovered from, and a half hour's solitude and reflection might have tranquillized her. But the 10 minutes only which now posted past was now interrupted. With all the restraints of her situation, she could do nothing towards tranquillity. Every moment brought her fresh agitation. It was overpowering happiness, and she had been beyond the first stage of fertile sensation. Charles, Mary, Anna, Rita, all came in. The absolute necessity of seeming like herself produced that immediately struggle, but after a while she could do no more. She began not to understand the word they said, and she obliged to lead indisposition to excuse herself. Then they could see that she looked very ill. They were shocked and concerned, and she would not stir without her for the world. This was dreadful. Would they have only gone away and left her in the quiet possession of that room if it had been to cure her? But all having standing and waiting around for her was distracting. In desperation, she would go home. "By all means, my dear," cried Mrs. Mungrove, "go home directly, and take care of yourself, that you may have been fit for the evening. I wish Sarah were here to doctor you, but I am no doctor myself. Charles, ring and order a chair. She must not walk." The chair would never do. Worse than all, to lose the possibility of speaking 2 words to Captain Wentworth in the course of her quiet, solitary progress up the town. She must feel almost certain of meeting him, could not be borne. The chair was Ernest protested against, and Mrs. Mungrove, who only thought one sort of illness, having assured her of some anxiety, there had been no fall in the case, and had time slipped down lately and got a blow on her head, that she was perfectly convinced of having no fall, and could part her cheerfully, and depend on finding better at night. Anxious to omit no possible precaution, Anne struggled and said, "I am afraid, ma'am, that it is not perfectly understood. Pray be so good that one mentioned that other gentleman we hope to see to your party this evening. I am afraid that there had been some mistake, and I wish you particularly to see Captain Harville and Captain Wentworth. I hope to see them both." "Oh, my dear, it is quite understood. I shall give you my word. Captain Harville will have no thought but of going." "Do you think so? But I'm afraid I should be so very sorry. Will you promise me to mention it when you see them again? You'll see them both this morning, I dare say. And do you promise? Do promise me." "To be sure, I will, if you wish it. Charles, if you see Captain Harville anywhere, remember to give Anne's message. But indeed, my dear, you need not be uneasy. Captain Harville told himself quite engaged, I'll answer for it, and Captain Wentworth the same, I dare say." Anne could not do no more. Her heart prophesied the mischance of the imperfection of her facility. It could not be very lasting, however, even if it did not come to Camden Place himself. It would be in her power to send an intelligible sentence of Captain Harville. Another momentary vexation occurred, and Charles, in his concern and good nature, would go home to her if there be no preventing him. It was almost cruel, but could be no long ungrateful. He was sacrificing an engagement at a gunsmith, and to be of use to her, and she set off with him, but no feelings of gratitude apparent. They round Union Street, and with a quicker step behind, a familiar sound, and gave her 2 moments' preparation for the sight of Captain Wentworth. He joined them, but if as resolute or on whether to join pass on, said nothing, only looked, and commanded herself to receive enough of that look, and not repulsively. Her cheeks, which had been pale now, glowed, and the movements which had hesitated were decided. He walked by her side, and presently, struck with sudden thought, Charles said, "Captain Wentworth, which way are you going? Only to Gay Street, or farther up town?" "I hardly know," replied Captain Wentworth with surprise. "Are you going as high as Belmont? Are you going near as Camden Place? Because if you are, I take no scruple in asking you to take my place, and give Anne your arm to her father's door. She is rather done for the morning. She must not go far without help, and I ought to be at the Fellows in the market, and he, prom- he promised me at the sight of the capital gun that he is going to be sent off, that this would keep unpacked the latest possible moment, and I might see it if I do not turn back now. I have no chance, by his description, and a good deal like the second-sized double-barrel of mine, which he shot with one day round Winthrop. There could be no objection, and could only be the proper cavalry. By the most obliging compliance for public view, the smiles reigned, and spirits dancing in private rapture. In half a minute, Charles was at the bottom of the Union Street again, and the other two proceeding. And soon the words had enough passed between them to decide their direction up towards the comparatively tiled retired gravel walk, in which their power of conversation would make the present hour a blessing indeed, and prepare for all immortality which had happiness recollections of their own future lives could bestow. There they exchanged again those feelings and promises which they had once before seemed to secure everything, which had been followed by so many years of division and estrangement. There they returned and into the past, more exquisitely and happy, perhaps, in the reunion, and in which at first projected the more tender, more tried, and more fixed in a knowledge of each other in truth, an attachment of more equal to act and more justified in acting. They slowly as they slowly paced the gradual ascent, heedless of every group around them, neither sauntering nor politicians, bustling housekeepers, flirting girls, nor nursery maids and children, they could indulge in these retrospections and acknowledgments, which especially in those explanations which had preceded the present moment, which were so poignant and ceaseless in interest. All the little variations of the last week were gone, and of yesterday there is scarcely be an end. She had not mistaken him. Jealousy of Mr. Elliot had been retarding the wait, and doubt the torment, that had begun to operate in the very hour of first meeting her in Bath, but in return, after a short suspension, to ruin the concert, that had influenced him in everything he had said and done, or omitted to say and do in the last 24 hours. It had been gradually yielding to the better hopes of her looks, or words, or actions, encouraged and vanquished at last of those sentiments. In those tones which had reached him while she talked to Captain Harville, the irresistible governance which he had seized the paper poured out of his feelings. Of what then he had written was not to be retracted or qualified. He persisted in having a loved one, none but her. She had never been so supplemented, and had been believed himself of her equal. Thus much indeed he was obliged to acknowledge that he had been conscious unconsciously, constant, and nay, unintentionally, as it meant to forget her, and was believed it to be done. He had imagined himself indifferent, and only had been angry, and had been unjust with her merits, and only been severed from them. Her character was now fixed on his perfection itself, and maintaining the loveliest medium of fortitude and gentleness. He was obliged to acknowledge that there was only at Uppercross that he had learned to do her justice, and only at Lyme had he begun to understand himself. At Lyme he had received lessons of more than one sort. The passing admiration of Mr. Elliot at least roused him, and the scenes on the Cobb had Captain Harville Victor's superiority. In the preceding attempts to attach himself to Louisa Mulgrove, in the attempts of angry pride, he protested that he had ever felt it to be impossible, and that he had not cared, and nor could not care for Louisa, though till that day, the leisure for the reflections which followed it, he had not understood in perfect excellence of the mind which Louisa could so ill bear a comparison of the perfect unrivalled hold as it possessed over his own. There had been learnt and distinguished over the steadiness of principle and the obstinacy of self-will, between the darings and the heedlessness, the resolution and the collected mind, and there had seen everything to exalt his estimation of the woman he had lost. But there they had begun to deplore pride and folly, the madness of resentment which had kept him from trying to regain her was then thrown his way. From that period of pensiveness had become severe. He had no sooner been free from the horror and remorse attending the first few days of Louisa's accident, no sooner begun to feel himself alive again than he had begun to feel himself, though alive, not at liberty. "I found," he said, "that I was considered by Harville an engaged man; that neither Harville nor his wife entertained a doubt of our mutual attachment. I was startled and shocked, and to a degree I could contract this instantly; but I was began to reflect that the others might have felt the same, that her own family, nay, perhaps herself. I was no longer at my own disposal, and I was hers in honour if she wished it. I had been unguarded, and had no seriously thought on the subject before. I had not considered that my excessive intimacy had must have danger of ill consequence in many ways. I been trying to whether I could attach myself to each of the girls, at the risk of raising an unpleasant report that there was no other ill effects. I had been grossly wrong, and must abide the consequences." He found it too late to entangle himself, and precisely he had become full satisfied of not caring for Louisa at all. He must regard himself as bound to her, if her sentiments for him were what Harville supposed, if determined to leave Lyme, her await the simple, complete recovery elsewhere. He would gladly weaken, by any fair means, whatever feelings or speculations concerning him might exist, and he went, therefore, to his brother, in meaning after a while to return to Kellynch, as circumstances might require. "I was 6 weeks with Edward," he said. "I saw him happy. I could have no other pleasure. I deserved none. He inquired after you very particularly, and asked if you were personally altered. I was little suspecting to my eye that you would never alter." Anne smiled, and let it pass. It was too pleasing to blunder for a reproach. It was something a woman to be assured in her 28th year. She had not lost one charm of her earlier youth, but the value of such homage was expressively increased to Anne, and that comparing it with former words and the feelings to be a result, nor the cause of the revival of his warm attachment. He had remained in Shropshire, and lamenting the blindness of his own pride, and the blunders of his own calculations, till at once released Louisa from the astonishing fallacious intelligence of her engagements by Benwick. "Here," he said, "entitled the worst of my state, and I have put at least myself in a way of happiness. I could exert myself. I could do something, but waited to be so long in action, and waited only for evil." He had been and had been dreadful. Within the first 5 minutes, I said, "I will be in Bath on Wednesday," and I was. It was unpardonable to think worth a while to come and arrive with some degree of hope. You were single, and it was possible that you might retain the feelings for the past, as I did. Only one encouragement, and happened to be mine, and I can never doubt that you have loved and sought others, but I knew for certain that you might refuse one man, and at least of better pretensions than myself. I could not help often saying, "Was this for me?" In their first meetings in the Millstone Street afforded much to be said, but their concert still more, that the evening seemed to be made up of exquisite moments, that her and stepping forward, an octagon room, speaking to him, and the moment of Mr. Elliott's appearing, tearing her away, one or two subsequent moments, followed by the returning hope and increase of despondency, they were dwelt on with energy. "To see you," cried he, "in the midst of those who could not be my well-wishers, to see your cousin close by you, conversing and smiling, and all the horrible eligibilities and properties of the match, and to consider it as a certain wish of every being who hoped to influence you, and even with your own feelings reluctant or indifferent to consider what powerful supports would be his. Was it not enough to make the fool of me which I appeared? How you look on without agony was it not the very sight of the friend who sat beside you? Was not the recollection of what I'd been, the knowledge of her influence, the indelible, immovable impression of what persuasion had once done? Was it not all against me? You should have been distinguished, replied Anne. You have not suspected me now, and the case is so different, but my age is so different. What if, what if I was wrong in yielding to persuasion once? Oh, remember me, and it was persuasion exerted me on the side of safety, not of risk. When I yielded, I thought it was to duty, but no duty could be called in aid here. In marrying a man indifferent to me, all the risk would have been cured, all my duties violated. Perhaps I ought to have reasoned thus, he replied, but I could not. I derived the benefit of late knowledge, and I acquired it of your character, and I could not bring up into play, which overwhelmed and buried the loss in those earlier feelings which have been very smarting under year after year. I could think of you as the only one who had yielded, who had given me up, who had been influenced by any one rather than me. I saw you with the very person who guided you with that year of misery. I had no reason to believe her less of her authority now, and the force of habit was to be added. I should have thought, Anne, that my manner to yourself might have spared you so much of all this. No, no, your manner might be the only ease your engagement to another man would give. I left you this belief, and yet I was determined to see you again. My spirits rallied with the morning, and I felt that I had only a motive for remaining here. At last Anne was at home again, and happier than any one in the house could have conceived. All surprise and suspense, every other painful part dissipated from this conversation. She re-entered the house so happy as to be obliged to find an alloy in some momentary apprehension of being impossible to last. In her interval of meditation, serious and grateful was the best correctiveness of everything dangerous in such a high-wrought facility. She went to her room, and she grew steadfast and fearless in the thankfulness of her enjoyment. The evening came, and the drawing rooms were lighted up. The company assembled, but it was a card party. It was a mixture of those who had never met before and those who had met too often, a commonplace business, too numerous for intimacy, too small for revivity. But Anne never found an evening shorter, glowing and lovely in sensibility and happiness, and more generally admired than she thought about or cared for. She had been cheerful and forbearing the feelings for every creature around her. Mr. Elliot was there, she avoided, and she could pity him. The Wallaces, she had amusement in understanding them. Lady Dalrymple, Miss Carteret, they had been innoxious cousins to her. She had not cared for Mrs. Clay, and had nothing to blush in for the public manners of her father and sister. With the Miss Mungroves there was a happy chat of perfect ease, and Captain Harville with the kind-hearted intercourse of her brother and sister. With Lady Russell attended that conversation with a delicious consciousness cut short, and the Admiral with Mrs. Croft Everything was peculiar cordiality of fervent interest, which the same consciousness sought to conceal. With Captain Wentworth, some moments communication continually occurring, and always the hope of more, and always the knowledge of him being there. It was one of these short meetings, which apparently occupied in admiring a fine display of greenhouse plants, and she said, "I have been thinking over the past and trying to impartially judge of those right and wrong. I mean to regard to myself that I believe I was right, and I've suffered more than it was perfectly right in being guided by the friend who you love better than you do to me now. She was in the place of a parent. Do not mistake me, however. I am not saying that I am perfectly right in being guided by the friend whom you will love better than you do now. To me, she was in the place of a parent. Do not mistake me, however. I am not saying that she did not err in her advice. It was, perhaps, one of those cases in which the advice is only good and bad as the event decides. And for myself, I certainly never should, in any circumstance of tolerable similarity, give such advice. But, I mean, I was right in submitting to her, and if I had done otherwise, I would have had suffered more in continuing the engagement if I even did in giving it up, because I should have suffered in my conscience, and I've now, as far as such a sentiment is allowed for human nature, nothing to reproach myself, and if I not mistake if I mistake not, a strong sense of duty is no bad part for a woman's portion. He looked at her, looked at Lady Little, and looking at her again, replied as if in cool deliberation, "Not yet. But these are hopes of her being forgiven in time, and I trust in being charity with her soon. But I too have been thinking over the past, and the question had suggested itself, whether there may not be one person more than an enemy than even a lady. My own self tell me if I returned to England in the year 8 with a few £1,000 and was posted to Laconia, then I have written to you, would you have answered my letter? Would you, in short, have renewed the engagement then?" "Would I?" was all her answer, but the accent was decisive enough. "Good God!" he cried, "you would!" It was not that I did not think of it, or desire it. It was what alone crowned with all my other successes. I was proud, too proud to ask again. I did not understand you. I shut my eyes, and would not understand you, or do justice. This is a recollection of what ought to make me forgive every one sooner than myself. 6 years of separation and suffering might have been spared, but it is a sort of pain which is new to me. I have been used to the gratification of believing myself to be earn every blessing that I enjoyed. I valued myself to honorable toils, just as rewards, and like other great men's under reverses. And he added, with a smile, "I must endeavor to subdue my mind to my fortune, and I must learn to brook being happier than I deserve."